Way. Oh, incredible. All right. Hey, take your Bibles and turn to the book of Zechariah if you can find it. Okay? If you can't find it, go to the New Testament, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Back up a couple of books, okay? So you've got Malachi and then Zechariah going backwards. Zechariah. And if you don't have a Bible, raise your hand and these guys will give you one. I want you to be able to follow along because it is my responsibility in this moment for these next few minutes to share with you the word of the Lord. Now, there are some parts of a Sunday morning message or a teaching time which are my words. It's sort of my explanation or my a little bit of a painting, a little bit of color to whatever God has to say. But I want you to double check. And when there are times where you say, Dan, where did you get that? Now, there are many times probably where you say that, but give me a break. I'm old. Everything reminds me of everything else. And so I just wander off into paths, and I have no idea where I left the path. I have no idea where I was. But when it comes to the scriptures, and when I say, thus saith the Lord, it is really important that we get it right. Because if I abuse that phrase, I'm actually abusing the third command, which says, thou shalt not take the name of the Lord thy God in vain. And when I say something and attribute it to God and he didn't say it, I'm abusing his name. Actually, when I take credit for something he said, I'm also abusing his name. So we're going to take a look at the word of the Lord as delivered by this guy by the name of Zechariah, okay? But let me provide the context again. And almost every week we do this as we plow our way through this particular series called Messengers. Zechariah, one of them. God's people have been in time out. Time out is just a euphemism for spanking. Now, when I was a kid, it was spanking. Now it's, sort of like time out or no screen time or whatever it might be. And this was a spanking for God's people for 70 years. God had put them in a captive situation. He put them in the corner because they had disobeyed him, because they had rebelled against him, because he told them over and over how to act, and they went the other way. And he reminded them of the consequences of their actions. And then finally God said, no, you're going to time out. And for 70 years they're in Babylon, which then was overtaken by the Medes and the Persians. And so you have this dynamic that takes place in a foreign land 1,000 miles away. And they're counting off the days. Because God had said it'll be 70 years. And the prophet Daniel, who we're not studying in this particular series, but the prophet Daniel was marking down the days on his calendar. And as the days drew closer, Daniel says, I guess I better start confessing my own sins and the sins of the people because the 70 years is just about up and I really want to go back home. Well, finally they did. They went back home. And when they got there, they were so excited for a little while. I think about, I don't have a home in Florida, but I think about what Hurricane Ian did to some areas of Florida here just a few weeks ago, and the fact that people had to evacuate. And then when they were able to go back, they saw the devastation. Well, that's exactly what happened to God's people. When they came back to their homeland, they saw the devastation. They tried to get some buildings started. They tried to start the building of the temple, but there was all kinds of opposition. And then the taxes were high, and I even suspect that probably inflation was high at the time. And then their identity was lost, and nobody cared what the nation of Israel had to say, and nobody was focusing on them anymore. And there was this huge world war which was developing between Persia to the northeast of Israel and Egypt, which was to the southwest of Israel, and Israel would be caught in the middle of it all. And all their initial enthusiasm now is gone. Made no sense. Didn't God say that we would be a great nation? Didn't he tell Abraham that his offspring would be as the sand of the seashore and as the stars of the heaven? Well, where is it? We're just a puny group of people who have no power on an international scene. We have no more golden years. We have no more influence. Where is this God? And this great king that God had promised us, where is he? Is it going to happen tomorrow? Is it going to happen with the next election? Contemporizing it a little bit. There were short seasons, and I want to draw you into that world because I think you're there. I think we're there. There were short seasons where they saw victories. There were short seasons where they saw the enemies judged. There were short seasons where they saw joy and peace. But it never lasted. And the geopolitical, which is just a fancy word for things going on in the world, the geopolitical scene was not shifting at all. I mean, there was no focus on Israel. And the people who came back from time out are thinking, we heard God left when we were taken into exile. And now that we've come back, he hasn't. And then in the middle of that, people just felt this personal despair because there was little evidence that hearts or lives were being changed. And so it was easiest to believe that God he doesn't care anymore. Obeying him doesn't seem to bring any benefit. And so I guess I just live for today. I need to pursue God with the best life possible right now and just grin and bear it. And basically I'm pessimistic and hopeless and despairing. Maybe you never feel that way. I'll bet you do. And it doesn't matter what age you are. It might even happen more often when you're young than when you're old. So what do we do? Well, it would seem rather strange for me if you came to me and said, Dan, I just have this sort of fog of pessimism in my heart and my life and my marriage and my relationships and my job and my health and all this kind of stuff. And probably I'm not going to refer you to Zechariah. But we are going to today. Zechariah comes on the scene. He comes just a few years after Haggai. That was last week, okay? Haggai, whose job along with Zechariah was to encourage people to rebuild the temple. And if there's a theme in the book of Haggai, Ty mentioned it last week, and I suggest perhaps it's the theme of the Bible, which is this. I know I like to say that the theme of the Bible is, God's relentless pursuit of his rebellious people. That's sort of the big theme. But if I were to shorten it even a little bit more, I would say the theme is, fear not, I'm with you. Over and over and over again, that phrase appears. And Haggai said that right in the middle of the book. Fear not, for I am with you. And then we face the Christmas season where the little baby born, we celebrate him. His name is God with us. Don't be afraid. God is with us. And Zechariah comes on the scene to simply inspire and motivate the people to continue to build this worship center called the temple. And he delivers, and I'm going to pick 3 messages from Zechariah. Just short shots. 3 messages in 14 chapters. One is a message of encouragement. Again, some of you need that. Maybe we all do. Another is a message of correction. challenge. And the third is a message of hope. And here's how they happen. Turn to chapter 4, Zechariah chapter 4. I can guarantee you, you have never read these chapters for family devotions, let alone the 3-year-old Sunday school class, which my wife teaches, and most recently their curriculum has been based upon the minor prophets like Nahum. And she comes to me, Dan, what am I going to say about Nahum to 3-year-old kids? Nonetheless, it is fascinating. Zechariah chapter 4 is a word of encouragement so that Zechariah reminds the people in chapter 4 of who's behind the curtain. Okay? You know the reference here. Who's making all of this work? And so Zechariah, in the first few chapters of Zechariah, receives these visions. Now, if you were to come to me and say, Dan, I got a vision from God, let me describe it for you, and please write it down. And I'm gonna say now, okay, wait a minute, what had you eaten before you got the vision? Who have you been around? Are you on some medicine, some psychosomatic stuff here along? But when Zechariah got these visions, they're recorded for us, for the instruction of the people who were in Zechariah's world, and also for our instruction. And here's one of the visions. This is the vision in chapter 4. You can glance through it, but let me just describe it for you this way. In the middle of the picture, and Zechariah is asked to describe what he saw, is a menorah, a 7-branched lampstand. Now, we sometimes look at those lampstands as candlesticks. That's what we have, if you have one of these around the house, 7-branched candlestick. It wasn't a candlestick. It was 7 branches with a little platform here, 7 little platforms, and on each platform sat a little oil lamp, which was a little earthen, piece of pottery with a little wick coming out of one end. And in that lamp was a bit of olive oil, and the olive oil, seeped into the wick, and you would light the wick, and that would provide light. There was one of these in the temple, in the tabernacle. And then on top of this golden menorah was a big bowl, and there were tubes running from the bowl down to each of those lamps. And then beside the menorah and beside the bowl were 2 large olive trees, and the oil for the lamps ran from the olive trees into the bowl and then through the tubes down into those 7 lamps. And the whole thing is lit up. And it's bright. And it's flowing. And the key behind it all is the oil. Now we'll come back to that in a moment, but I kind of like Zechariah because I'd look at that and I'd say, Lord, I need more information than just that picture. I have no clue what that is. It doesn't make any sense. It won't drive. It won't fly. It won't make anything. What is it anyway? And so God has to get, and by the way, that's how I typically go into a museum of art. I need somebody with me to help me understand what that painting is all about. And then they ask me things like, Dan, what do you think it is? I'm thinking, don't tell me. I mean, you've heard me tell you about my friend Mike, incredible artist who was a part of our church family for many years, and he sold huge paintings for several $1,000s to motels and hotels for their atriums and so on. It was incredible. And one day he invited me over to his studio here in town. I walked in the studio, said, Mike, I don't understand anything. Tell me, what does this mean? No, Dan, this is in the eye of the beholder, and no, tell me what it means. Because I can articulate it after you tell me. It was like high school literature class, reading a poem. And you know that you're going to be tested on the poem, and you read this, and the teacher says, what do you think it means? And I never got it right. Never got it right. But once I heard somebody else explain it, and once I heard her explain it, I could regurgitate it on a test. Zechariah, what is this? Turns out that the olive trees represent probably the two people responsible for rebuilding the temple. And it could very well be that the menorah and the bowl and so on represent the temple. And it means that, look, I want you to finish the temple. I want you to finish this project, this building project, which seems really, really sort of infantile in view of eternity. Why in the world is there such a strong commitment to completing the temple? Well, remember, again, last week, Ty explained the fact that when the people came back from time out, one of the first things they did was to lay the foundation, the footings, for the new temple. And when the footings were laid, the groundbreaking had happened, and the footings were poured. The young people were so excited. They're cheering, they're celebrating, they're shouting, they're waving, they're excited. And the old people are in the back crying because they remember the first temple. And this one is so small compared to the first one. It's so sad. Yet Zechariah says, finish the job. And in the middle, take a look at verse 6 of chapter 4. You're there in chapter 4, so I better make you at least read something here, okay? The last part of verse 6, here's the key to the entire vision. Not by might, nor by power, but by my Spirit, says the Lord Almighty. You know, one symbol of the Holy Spirit is oil. This whole thing, this whole picture of the trees and the bowl and the lampstand and the oil is a picture of God's work. And guess who's behind the curtain? My Spirit, says the Lord Almighty. Look, folks, you may be in the process of raising kids. You may be in the process of getting an education. You may be in the process of learning a new job. You may be in the process of a new relationship. Whatever it might be, you say, how am I going to accomplish this on my own? What kind of goals can I set in front of me so that I can pull this off? And God says, for the Christian, it's not by your power, not by your might, but by my Spirit, says the Lord Almighty. The problem is that every so often we think that what we're doing is just so insignificant. It really doesn't matter very much. In fact, if you glance down at verse 10, God says, who despises the day of small things? In other words, what I'm doing is just a little tiny thing in the day when I want to make a difference for Jesus. What I'm doing is such a small, insignificant thing. You know what? There are no small, insignificant things in God's sight. And that's the point that Zechariah wants to make. Your job in rebuilding the temple, your job in laying the cornerstone, your job in constructing something or hammering out a little bit of gold or sewing up a curtain or whatever it might be, you might think it's just a very small part, but it's not. In the eyes of God, there is no insignificant thing. And in the spirit of what Jamie said about serving, you say, I'm just with kids. No, you're not. You're not just with kids. You're with kids. And Jesus said, the way you treat kids tells me something about what you think of me, Jesus, and what you think of yourself. That's chapter 4. Oh, there's a whole lot more there. And there's some fascinating word pictures in the chapters around chapter 4. Go over to chapter 7. Chapter 7, this is a challenge. This is a time for correction. Here we had the word of encouragement. Remember, not by might nor by power, but by my Spirit. Now we have a time for correction. There's some course corrections that need to take place. And the question comes up, why do we have to fast? I mean, this is a spiritual diet kind of thing, okay, we're talking here. Why do we have to fast? We're fasting over things that have long since passed. You know, we're sort of celebrating those things with a spiritual fast. Do we have to do that anymore? And the answer comes back with a question. But before I do that, I'm going to put some dates on the screen. I want you to tell me what that date represents, because we as a nation have a lot of dates in our history, and to try to keep track of them all is just enormous. And if we have a holiday for every one of them, we're not going to get any work done. Okay, but anyway, let's just put some up. December 7th, 1941. What's that? Pearl Harbor Day, a day that will live in infamy. Okay, December 7th, 1941. By the way, this is a rabbit trail. The day, notice verse 1 of chapter 7. Most of you do not care. I should just skip this. It says, the 4th year of King Darius, the word of the Lord came to Zachariah on the 4th day of the 9th month, the month of Kislev. You know what that date is in biblical history? That date is December 7th, 518 BC. We can date it. We know when Darius was the king. We know when the month of Kislev was, and so on. It's December 7th, 518. Anyway, nonetheless, let's go to the next one. Next date. Yeah, President Kennedy was assassinated on November 22nd, 1963. How about the next one? This is going to be a little harder. Yeah, the explosion of the Challenger space shuttle. Now, knowing my background, okay, you're saying he had to throw that one in. When the Challenger blew up on January 28th, 1986 and took, was it 7 or 9 astronauts in death? I mean, it was horrific. And I wept. Okay, I'm 35 years old at that point. And I just wept because I'm thinking, some engineer made a mistake. And it resulted in the death. And I feel like I'm one of them. Yeah, the explosion of the Challenger. Okay, the next one. No, some more of you are joining in here now, okay? 9/11. This is 9/11. We know 9/11, but it's 2001, okay? Some of you were not even thought of yet. 2001. Okay, so how about this one? Yeah, it's Christmas last year. I thought those of you who haven't been with us at all so far, you'd get this one. It's Christmas from last year, all right? December 25th, 2021. All right, now back to the point. So the Hebrew people are saying, why do we have to keep all these celebrations? And we fast for every one of them. I hate the fasting. And then their question is answered with a question, and really the issue is this. Is your heart in it? You know, Joel talked about worship. Is your heart in this? In the fasting, is your heart in it? Because that really is the key. It's not whether you keep it on the calendar, but is your heart in it? Is it reality, or is it just sort of a ritual kind of thing? And frankly, I have a hard time answering that question. When I come to worship with you guys, and you have no idea. I had a text from one of our daughters this week who had led worship last Sunday, and she said, I was so overwhelmed in their church with just hearing people sing. Now, worship is a whole lot more than just singing. It's a whole lot more than just music, and Joel made that clear that even our giving is part of worship, and our Bible study and so on is a part of worship. But when I come in here, is my heart really into it? Well, in chapter 7, in answer to this question, God says, this is how your faith shows. This is how your faith shows. Now, this is how you can determine if your worship is real or not. And then he says, let's go down to verse 8. This is chapter 7, verse 8. The word of the Lord came again to Zechariah. This is what the Lord Almighty says. Administer true justice. I'll just stop right there. I get sick and tired of the word justice. And that is wrong on my part, because it is so abused. Justice really means I want you to get what I think you should get. And I want to get what I think I should get. And it's become abused. I went back to Tony Evans, Dr. Tony Evans down at Oak Cliff Bible Church in Texas. And his definition of justice is this, and I like this definition. He said, the impartial and equitable application of God's moral law in society. You know, the application of God's moral law. Now, we've made up moral law. We've made it up. We're talking about God's moral law. That's justice. Now, here's the dilemma that we as Christians face. I want justice for those who hurt me, for them. I want justice for them, but I want forgiveness for me. And so we take the whole issue of justice, and frankly, I'll have to admit, spiritually, I don't want justice. I don't want justice. I do not want I want forgiveness. And so we take that conflict and we sort of throw them together, and we think that there's only one option, and until we get to the cross. And the cross is the intersection of forgiveness and justice. And then as best we can, we as Christians should implement as Evans says, the impartial and equitable application of God's moral law in society. Practice justice. There's a whole lot more to that. I think that's what God means when he talks about it here in Zechariah chapter 7. And then secondly, it says, show mercy. This is verse 8 again. Actually, verse 9. Show mercy and compassion to one another. That's brotherly kindness. You know what? You guys are jerks. I woke somebody up. And so am I. And we're in this together. And when people identify, and you've used this many, many times, I've used it many times, when people identify Calvary, oh, Calvary, I know so-and-so, and they're the biggest hypocrites I know. And of course, what is our answer? There's always room for one more. Come join us. That's what we are. We're a bunch of hypocrites. We're a bunch of people who are struggling in our spiritual walk and so on. And yet it is my obligation to show you and for you to show me brotherly love, which is that whole definition of mercy and compassion. Live to love. That's the second part of it. Live to love one another. And then third, do not oppress the widow or the fatherless or the alien or the poor in your hearts. You know, when I identify these, I've always kept this in mind. The widow has no breadwinner. Again, I'm looking at traditional roles, okay? But a widow has no breadwinner. Now, in our world today, sometimes widows are the richest persons that I know, okay? But still, we need to care for them. And when we put them away or consider them lesser individuals, we are violating the heart of God. The fatherless, those are orphans. Those are those who have no protector. They have no protector. And then you have the aliens or the transients. Transients are just different. They speak a different language. They look different and so on. And what are we supposed to do? We're supposed to care for them. And then you have the poor who have no bargaining power financially. That's the heart of God. Then finally, in the last part of verse 10, in your hearts, don't think evil of each other. One of the rules that I've learned as an old guy, whenever I hear a comment or a perspective on some conversation or relationship, I always think, there's another side to this. I'm not hearing everything. I mean, even when I tell you a story, you're not hearing the whole story. I'm just picking what I want to tell you to sort of support my point or, make you cry or make you laugh or make you throw stuff at me or whatever it might be. But this says I need to have proper motives. I need to give people a break. Correction. Is your heart in it? The fasting which was a part of worship, is your heart in it? Is it real or is it ritual? Now, sometimes it has to start like ritual until it becomes real. Don't wait for it to be like, I want this to be real before I engage it. No. What did somebody throw at me? I'd never heard this phrase before. Fake it till you make it. I'd never heard that until about 2 weeks ago. And I thought, I'm writing that one down, because there are times when I've got to fake it until I make it. I mean, getting up in the morning, every single morning I'm a hypocrite. I get up and I don't want to. And Lee doesn't say, you big hypocrite, go back to bed. She doesn't, for some reason, doesn't do that. Well, maybe she does. Anyway, nonetheless, is your worship real? Now, let's go to the third point I want to make from the book of Zechariah. It's chapter 9. Go to chapter 9. I want to give you through the words of Zechariah, or through my words, I want God to give you some hope for tomorrow. Some hope to keep going. Chapter 9, verses 9 and 10. One of the things you'll notice, and if you have a reference Bible, I don't know if this happens in your smart devices and so on, but in a reference Bible, you'll notice that there's some headings every so often in the chapter. And if you look at the next few chapters of Zechariah, you'll find that almost every heading is about the future. It's about what's down the road. So chapters 1 through 6 really had to do with the present and rebuilding the temple. And then chapter 7 had to do, you got some course corrections you need to make. Here's a challenge for you because you haven't been treating the poor. You haven't been treating the fatherless. You haven't been treating the aliens. You haven't been treating the widows correctly. And I'd throw in, children. Are we treating kids correctly? That whole issue along the way. And then in chapters 9 through the end of the book, here's what's going to happen. And I really like, if I were Jewish, I really like the first part of chapter 9, which is a prophetic section about God taking care of my enemies. And I want to cheer him on. Go get him, God. But then it changes a little bit in verse 9. Look at verse 9. Rejoice greatly, O daughter of Zion. Shout, daughter of Jerusalem. See, your king comes to you, righteous and having salvation, gentle and riding on a donkey, on a colt, the foal of a donkey. Okay, this is like class now. I like that context better anyway. What is that last part of the verse a reference to? What day? Palm Sunday. The New Testament author. If I were an Old Testament guy and I hadn't had the New Testament yet, and I'd look at this, I'd say, well, it just means that he's going to come sort of in a humble condition. No, he's going to literally, turns out, he's going to literally come on a donkey. And the New Testament authors identify this reference in Zechariah chapter 9 as a specific prophetic, 500 years before the event, detail about the coming of Jesus. He's coming the first time. Now, this is a problem for us. Because it's like, wait a minute. how should a king come? It's like, I imagine, I like to, again, contemporize it. I imagine Jesus coming in an F-22 Raptor. Now, for those of you, again, my background, this is the latest fighter jet available. Or a B-21 bomber. I mean, that's the latest bomber that we have available in the U.S. Fleet. That's how but he's on a tricycle. He's coming on a tricycle. It's just, I know it doesn't say that in the text, that the word donkey means tricycle. But anyway, it doesn't fit. So the people, he doesn't fit, so they rejected him. And then we have verse 10. Now, please understand, and if you have your copy here of a Bible, you ought to just make a mark here between 9 and 10 and say, we've got at least 2,000 years happening between verses 9 and 10. 2,000 years. Look at verse 10. I'll take away the chariots from Ephraim, the war horses from Jerusalem, the battle bow will be broken. You know what that means? God's going to diffuse every single nuclear bomb. No weapon will be effective when Christ comes back again. Then it goes on. He will proclaim peace to the nations. His rule will extend from sea to sea, from the river to the ends of the earth. Folks, that's not today. It's not today at all. In fact, it seems to be getting worse rather than better. It seems as if Jesus' influence is becoming weaker. But we can expect that when Jesus comes back, there will be not only peace on earth, but there'll be a future for these people known as God's people, the people of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And we look forward to that. So let me wander for just a moment. We're not going to establish this kingdom that's described in verse 10 on earth through the ballot box or through the posting of 10 commandments on every street corner or through the reciting of prayers in public events or even through revival in the church. All those things are, I like them. I use them. But they're intended to restrain evil. That's the purpose that we have as citizens of this world. We are to restrain evil, knowing full well that the gospel needs to get out there because Christ is coming back. And as someone said, boy, is he mad. And it won't be until he returns that this day will occur. And we anticipate it. And it ends well. It really ends well. That's the hope I want to give you. I had a good friend of mine come up to me. I did not ask his permission to share this. I'm going to anyway, and he can beat me up later. He said, Dan, I have a confession to make. The Tuesday night of the election, the Wednesday morning, the Thursday morning, I was mad. I was just mad. In fact, I was so mad I got depressed. Until God said, look, I'm still on the throne. And I just almost feel like every election makes people mad, except for the fact that the ads end. I don't care where you are. I don't care where you are politically. God's still on the throne. His values will win. Jesus said, after listing signs of the times, signs that the end is near, he said in Luke, stand up, lift up your heads, because your redemption is drawing near. And then later he said in the same speech, he said, when you see these things happening, you know that the kingdom of God is near. I don't want to bring on the end of the world as we know it. I want to restrain that as much as possible, using whatever means I have that are God-given means. But I will realize that the end is coming. And then there will be peace. We're going to conclude this service with some worship and some communion. Communion is actually part of worship. Now, those of you who may be visiting today say, oh no, what's coming next? What are we going to do? Let me explain it. We got little pieces of cracker, which represent Christ's broken body, and we have little cups of grape juice, which represent his shed blood. And if you're a Christian, you're welcome to go to one of the tables in the auditorium. The one back there has gluten-free bread at it. So if you need that, go that direction. And if you don't need it, you can still take from over there. It's not going to hurt you, okay? It becomes chaotic in here, okay? In the next few minutes, it's just going to be chaotic. But you're welcome to participate. And if you don't want to, just sit where you are. It's okay. It represents our relationship to Jesus. Now, there's something that happens that I've had people ask me, Dan, in communion, people are cracking their cups. What are they doing? Well, first of all, I'm glad they're not glass cups. They're just plastic. But I got to give you the history here, okay? Like 25 years ago, one of our great young men here at Calvary who's gone to be with Jesus just a couple of years ago, Gary Schrock, was doing a sketch about what it's like to show up in church and you don't know for sure what's happening. So he's making light of it, and we're all getting a good laugh out of it, except for the person who's there for the first time who realizes, yeah, that's exactly how I feel. I'm not sure how this is going to work, and do I participate? Don't I participate? Well, in the middle of all that, he's so nervous that he cracks his communion cup in this sketch. Well, for some reason, we picked up on that as a congregation, and people started cracking their cups. So we decided, rather than referring to Gary Schrock every time we do that, let's just give it some meaning. And I would suggest this. By the way, don't do it if you're afraid it's going to cut you or anything like that. And we don't want that to happen. But if you do, we use it as a symbol of finality. A sacrifice once for all. It's almost as if we're saying along with Jesus from the cross, it is finished. Well, along with that, it was 1863. What major U.S. event was going on in 1863? The Civil War. Folks, if you think things are tough now, just try to go back there and live that world. Families are killing their relatives sometimes in the name of righteousness, and a lot of them are Christians on both sides. And the issues were kind of different too. In the middle of that, Abraham Lincoln, who in a sense is a messenger, maybe not in the sense of Zachariah, but Abraham Lincoln gave this proclamation. He listed an entire paragraph of things for which Americans needed to be grateful. Grateful in the middle of we're talking the middle of the Civil War. And after he gave this list of 8 or 10 things for which Americans ought to be grateful, and they're really honorable things, he said this: no human counsel has devised, nor hath any mortal hand worked out these great things. They are gracious gifts of the highest God, who while dealing with us in anger for our sins, hath nevertheless remembered mercy. And then he called on all Americans everywhere to set aside and quote, here we go, a day of thanksgiving and praise to our beneficent Father who dwelleth in the heavens. And it became a proclamation, a declaration. You guys are going to spend time with some goofy people over Thanksgiving. And those people are you. And no, not I know you are. There are a lot of things that can get us angry. But would you please take time just to be grateful? In the middle of the Civil War, Lincoln is saying, remember who's given us every good thing. I wish our politicians would say that today, but nonetheless, take time to do that. And would you take time to do that with